Good morning, good afternoon, everybody, depending on your time zone. Thank you very much to Sakura for giving me the opportunity to talk with you today about something that I think is a lot of fun and one of my real interests, which is process improvement. So we'll start off with one of my favorite quotes from Lewis Carroll. First thing I've got to do, said Alice to herself, is to grow to my right size again. I think that will be the best plan. Sounded like an excellent plan, no doubt, and very neatly and simply arranged. The only difficulty was that she had not the smallest idea how to set about it. And for me, that sums up where a lot of us are at the beginning of our stories with process improvement, is that you know there's something that you need to do. You might even see something right in front of you and go, oh, that's the topic, that's the product, that's what we should do. But how do you go about it? So the reason I got interested in process improvement is because attending the workshops at the NSH, I went to some great workshops, but they were always people's stories. It was the equivalent of, my lab has brown windows and blue curtains, and this is what we did. Very interesting. My lab has blue curtains and square windows. So the story that the presenter has is interesting, but it really didn't help me very much in my particular circumstance. So I got involved in process improvement and really the beginner's guide because I didn't have any idea how to get started. So as a supervisor, and then as a manager, it's like, well, how do you get these things going? We can all look around our laboratories and say, well, there's an opportunity here. It's just a question of how do we get there. So I told you why I'm here, and really, why are you here? Well, chances are that you have challenges in your laboratory, whether it's the increased workload and a decreased workforce, or the changes in healthcare, accountable care organizations, or reduction in budgets, or improved standards of care. I mean, these are things that I know a few years ago were, cutting edge, and now these things are day-to-day expectations. So one of the things we have to kind of think about is the rate of change and how fast things are changing. So if we look at, 1542, Columbus sailed the ocean blue, not much happens after that with transportation until we get to the Wright brothers in 1903. 1953, Watson and Crick and the double helix. 1954, Brown versus the Topeka Board of Education, which overturned Plessy versus Ferguson, which was the ruling that allowed state-sponsored segregation. Then we go to the lunar landing, and finally, Dolly, the first clone mammal. So 43 years from Watson and Crick theorizing a double helix to cloning the first mammal. If we were ever confused how fast things are changing, I think that's a great example. So to some extent, laboratories are subject to Darwin's theory of evolution like animals are. Natural selection through competition means we have to evolve or perish. I've been involved in laboratories for the best part of 30 years now and seen an awful lot of changes, not just from a technical perspective, but from a billing perspective, from a compliance perspective. There is nothing that says that your laboratory has to be there tomorrow. If you work for a government laboratory, you probably right. But for everybody else, this is a competitive environment, and so your laboratory has to evolve. And otherwise, there's nothing to say that your work won't suddenly go somewhere else. So process improvement sounds a little vague, and so this is a nice definition of it. We can really break it down to the key words here, which is a systematic approach to positively influence. And that's really the crux of the matter. When we have an initiative, then we want to use a systematic approach, and the outcome needs to be positively influenced. So this is an important part of the presentation, PDSA, Plan, Do, Study, Act. So this is the methodology that I advocate. Different arenas, I'm a Six Sigma guy, but Six Sigma talks about defects in parts per million. In histology, we're nowhere near being able to measure that. We're looking at defects in parts per 1,000 or parts per 100. Whether you consider the defect to be bubbles under the cover slip, variability in your H&E or your IHC staining, chatter, holes on your sections, wrinkles. So I find that Plan, Do, Study, Act is a very nice philosophy to be able to move forward in the laboratory without getting too hung up on Six Sigma. For those folks that are Six Sigma or are green belts or black belts, then yay for you. Many of the tools are the same. It's just a little bit of a different philosophy of how to approach things. So the first part of Plan, Do, Study, Act is obviously plan. And quote from Eisenhower, in preparing for battle, I have found that plans are useless, but planning is indispensable. In other words, as soon as the first shot is fired, then all of those plans that you spent all that time working on are somewhat irrelevant, except for the fact that the process of planning is indispensable and helps you adapt to whatever the next steps are. So planning is the most important part of the entire project, and for a lot of people that's difficult because, let's say in your laboratory you see something that is pretty obvious that you need to fix. It doesn't really matter what the topic is, but you see it, it's right there in front of you, and you want to start doing. And the problem with that is that you haven't planned properly, and that increases the likelihood of failure of the initiative. So we're going to talk in very general terms today, and I'm not being deliberately obtuse. The idea is to just kind of explain the philosophy to you so that you can then internalize it and look at your problems. My fear is if we talk about a specific instance in detail, then we'll be in the same problem that I was in before with the red curtains and round windows. So planning is about defining, and so poor planning is often the cause of unsatisfactory process improvement because perhaps the person who's initiating the project doesn't have the authority to make any subsequent change. Perhaps there is a predetermined outcome. I've been a facilitator for hospital groups, and I worked with a nurse manager one time. She asked me to put together a team and facilitate a group to come to the outcome that she wanted. In other words, she wanted me to steer everybody to her predetermined outcome. So I said no, that I wouldn't facilitate a team that way, because if you have the authority to make the change without involving anybody else, then forming a team to come to that outcome is a sham. And we can get bogged down because of loss of momentum. The enthusiasm, the energy of identifying the problem in the first place tends to wane when you get to the heavy lifting that goes along with moving it forward. So that's loss of momentum. Also, not everybody is going to be interested in the improvement. Those people that it impacts directly, of course, but other people that are more tangentially involved may not have the same degree of interest. And lastly, if nobody's driving the bus, with any initiative, somebody has to actually be at the controls and steering the thing moving forward. That doesn't mean providing all the answers, but it does mean driving the process along. So there are questions that you can ask for each modification that you want to make. What are we trying to accomplish? Why are we trying to accomplish it? Who needs to be involved? And how will we know the modifications are an improvement? So we'll summarize the answers in an opportunity statement. So if you look around your laboratory, there is something that you think, this is something that we can work on. So that's what we are trying to do. We are trying to improve something by doing something else. Next bit is who needs to be involved. So let's presume that we want to solve a delivery issue. Then the pathologist probably needs to be involved. A logistics issue. Then the hospital porter or the couriers need to be involved. And then lastly, how will you know the modifications are an improvement? It's not rocket science and it's not terribly complicated. You don't have to do an awful lot of work at this point. You are just getting the ball rolling. So this doesn't have to be terribly polished, but ask these questions and then develop your first opportunity statement. You keep going back to this statement to make sure that you don't get sidetracked or start heading down the wrong rabbit hole. Scope creep, as we refer to it at Progenity, can be a problem as you discover more things about whatever your initiative is. And people get sidetracked and want to follow these threads that extend from the initial opportunity. It's important to remember that you need to stay on course for one opportunity at a time. So I've been doing this for a long time, but I still use the following opportunity statements to get the ball rolling. So an opportunity exists in the Progenity laboratory to improve the turnaround time of slides for the pathologist. This is in the response to the perceived need that the pathologist wants the slides earlier. Modification will be designed and implemented by a collaborative team vested in the turnaround time or slide delivery process. So I know this may seem like we're talking at a 6th grade level, but having a framework like this just allows you to insert the specific instances and the work's done for you. So let's say you're now excited about the idea of doing process improvement. What should you start on? Well, maybe there's something that's obvious right in front of you. But if you just think that there is just a general malaise in your lab, you think there's an opportunity that everything could rise to a new level, then look around. So what are the clues for initiatives that you could follow? So rules are being bent or broken to relieve stress on a system, or systems that are affected by a change in an external stressor. So let's say, for example, that you're a dermatology lab and you have a new client who is going to start sending, many more specimens each day. So now you have a volume issue, and perhaps the opportunity is increased automation to handle this increased volume. So your overall system is affected by the external stressor, which is increasing volume. Or an impact on the system is sustained. So it's okay to have a dermatologist do a weekend punch clinic and chuck a whole load of specimens at you on a Monday once. But if that becomes an every weekend or an every day system impact, then you need to change it. And then the last one is any system held together with duct tape. And I hope some of you at least are smiling, because most labs have some system like that buried deep in their SOPs. And maybe it's just a function of we are just so busy we never got to writing the proper SOP for it, or it's a rare event and we just make it up as we go along when that happens. All of these clues can help you identify what your topic change is. So who needs to be involved? So there are key opinion leaders or key stakeholders for each initiative. There are very few things in the lab, in my experience, where only one person will be affected by a change. Therefore, you need to involve all of those people, or at least the key people, at this part of the process. It's important to make sure that you have these key stakeholders, otherwise process improvement can look like this. So let's presume that we need to involve the technicians, the real workers. You can give yourselves a round of applause. Without you, nothing happens. Then we have our managers and supervisors. You will recognize this image. That's certainly what my job looks like a lot of the time, even with the silly hat. And eventually, we have to be accountable to our bosses, whether that's folks being counted. Most require some kind of expense. Maybe it's pretty insignificant. Maybe it's a capital expense. You need a new piece of equipment, such as some of these Sakura automation. So is there anybody else that should be involved in our process here? Well, we all have customers. Whether your customers are pathologists, clinicians, patients, you have a customer somewhere. Perhaps it's another lab. So are there other departments? Are you talking about having to do a lab build-out? Do you have to look for permits or engineers? Are you going to knock a wall down? You need facilities management. You need to plug in a new piece of equipment. Maybe you need, electrical to be run. So these guys, these people, they can be ad hoc members of your process improvement team. But at some point, you're going to have to reach out to them and talk to them about what you're trying to do. So why not give them a heads up and say, we're thinking of looking at this, and we'll give you a call as we move through the process. It doesn't need to be much more complicated than that. If you don't invite them, however, process improvement can end badly. All right, so we have our opportunity statement. And now we're going to come up with a mission statement for our team. As we mentioned, it's unlikely you can do all of this by yourself, so we'll involve more people. Our core group develops and shapes the opportunity statement and creates the mission statement. So the mission of this process improvement opportunity is to reduce the turnaround time of slides delivered to the pathologist. Now we all know that the time you deliver slides to the pathologist versus the time the pathologist signs the slides out are not necessarily connected. However, for this example, turnaround time to the pathologist is the whole point. The last part, and this is important, we will determine the success of the improvement by evaluating measurable data. So how do you know that the changes that you make are an improvement? So we need to collect some sort of data. When we do that, we'll have our baseline. Once we have our baseline, we can establish our target, and we also need to determine what will pass-fail be. We are just heading towards football season, and those of you old enough to remember the NFL before instant replay will remember that we had a couple of seasons where they were trying out instant replay. And so the owners discussed whether they wanted instant replay, and the players discussed it, and finally they said, okay, we'll do a trial. This number of games, for this number of teams, we will try instant replay. So they did it for a year, and at the end of the next owners meeting they said, okay, what do you think about instant replay? And half the owners were for, and half the owners were against. And the NFL said, we didn't actually have a pass-fail measure for this. It was just an experiment. So the next year they did it again, And this time they actually determined pass-fail before the began the initiative, and lo and behold, instant replay passed, and now we just take it for granted. But that just illustrates the need to establish a pass-fail, a threshold or a bar to meet when we're collecting data. So I can hear everybody groan about, oh, we have to collect data, how much do we have to collect, and how long do we do it for? And the answer is just enough and just long enough to show that the process was an improvement. I think every lab that I've ever worked for or visited as a consultant, there are mountains of paperwork that go on and lots of data that's collected. And when I'm consulting, one of the first questions I ask is, why are you collecting it? Of course, there are things that you need to manage for, CAP, clear, QA, QC, things like that. But I'm willing to bet that most of you will have some form of documentation in your lab that you do every day that nobody has any idea why you do it. You just do it. And it's probably a holdover from some initiative, maybe years ago, where someone said, I'd like to see, how much of this we do. And that has become part of laboratory law, and it's just something that you do without thinking. So one takeaway I would hope would be, to question the documentation that you make right now and find out if you need it. And if you don't need it, stop doing it. So from a process improvement perspective, we've identified our topic. We have decided that we are going to look at it by evaluating data. We have a baseline, so we know where we're starting from. And then we can set a target to where we want to get to. So, for example, let's say that we are looking at the turnaround time. We monitor, maybe for a week or 2 weeks, the time that the slides end up on the pathologist's desk. Turns out that they are all on his desk or her desk by 10 o'clock in the morning. And the pathologist says, well, I want them on my desk at 9 o'clock in the morning. Okay, so you have a baseline, and now you have a target. And pass-fail is obviously, do you reach that target or not? So another thing to do is to think about how you're defining these measurements and what the tools are. So let's say that you're in a facility that does frozen sections. You are required to keep track of your turnaround time for frozen. So what is that going to be? Well, it's the number of minutes to the nearest minute from the time the specimen is delivered to the grossing area till the report is delivered to the surgeon. So this is a hospital-based initiative, and we are doing frozen sections on sentinel nodes, and obviously we need to manage that. But I would imagine that if I asked you the time, half of you will pull out your phone, the other half will look at your wrist, and a couple of you will look at the clock on the wall, and there will be some variation in how in the answers that come back as to what time it is. The same way if we are measuring a time in the frozen section area, maybe you glance up at the wall clock when the specimen comes in, and you glance at your watch when you deliver the report to the OR. So we need some standardization. So let's define what the tool is. So the instrument is going to be the grossing area clock. So now we all know how we're. Lastly, how are we recording it? Well, our procedure is that the technician records the data in the frozen section logbook. So now we've standardized our data collection. Depending on your initiative, slight variation can really skew the results one way or the other. So once we have data, whatever that may be, then what do we do with it? Well, there are relational tools and there are data tools, and there are all sorts of things that we could look at. And actually, there's another workshop that we could do on what these tools are. Most people are familiar with XMR charts and run charts, even if the names don't mean anything to you. Force field analysis is a great one, looking at a big picture. So that's the idea of if you have a giant boulder and you're trying to move it one way or the other, the forces for good, if you like, the force to move the boulder from one way to another, are held in check by the resistant forces. So you can't create or destroy forces, but you can magnify or minimize them. So force field analysis diagram is a great way to identify what is the barrier to being able to roll the boulder in one direction. We don't have time to get into to all of these, but I can refer you to a great website that's called moresteam.com, they have something called the Knowledge Center. And if you go to the website, click on the Knowledge Center, then it says free tools and resources, and there are examples of relational and data tools, and you will very quickly see which are the tools that are appropriate for your particular initiative. So step by step, the first thing we do is, what are we trying to accomplish? Why are we trying to accomplish it? That will lead to our preliminary opportunity statement. Who needs to be involved? So let's identify who those key stakeholders are. We get them together. Everybody says, this is a splendid idea, we should pursue this. And that allows us to develop our preliminary mission statement. So our key stakeholders say, okay, so we're going to need a team in order to accomplish this. So who else needs to be involved? We'll gather those people together. There's ground rules. Now we're going to talk about ground rules and team meetings in a little while. The first task of the team is to assess the current state of affairs. It will lead to a revised mission statement. What that means is you just evaluate exactly where you are, decide what data tools you're going to look at, and establish your baseline. So once we've established the baseline, let's set a target. How will we know that whatever change we make is an improvement? So now we're going to brainstorm solutions. Here's one of my favorite bits here. So we have our problem. There is more than one solution for every problem. Some of them will be crazy and won't work. Some of them will be splendid and things that we should look at. And some brainstorming solutions actually generate new initiatives to look at. Farm and Glamour is my favorite. They may be familiar to you. They make baking soda. So in my world, Farm and Glamour has a brainstorming session. And back in the day, they said, okay, so baking soda. Everybody has a little jar of baking soda in the fridge. What can we do with baking soda that will get people to buy this more than once every 6 months? So they had a brainstorming session. They said, I know, let's put it in toothpaste. Genius. Let's put it in laundry detergent. Fantastic. How about cat litter, carpet cleaner, pool maintenance, antiperspirants? We'll put it in wound cleaning solutions, contact lens cleaner. You know what? I think that we can even just get people to throw it straight down the toilet. What a genius brainstorming solution that was. So if you look at the history of Farm and Glamour, sales of baking soda went up pretty dramatically when they discovered they could put it in just about every product out there. So we go through our brainstorming process. There are lots of ways of doing that. Again, that's another workshop that we could do sometime. So out of our 20 ideas, we think that 10 deserve a closer review. And then, you know what, out of that 20, we looked at 10, there's 3 of them that are really the front runners, and then our team will choose the most viable solution to examine. Well, you know, we're still at the planning phase here, folks. So now we're going to plan to implement the solution. All of this work is to get to our experiment. So we've identified which solution we're going to look at, declare victory and move on. Well, not quite. We have to start doing now. So there's really just one slide for the do slide, I'm afraid. So we're going to implement the adjustment. This is an experiment. One of the fears that people have is that something is going to be implemented that is worse than what we have right now. Fear of the unknown and the fear that things might not be an improvement can really stagnate the process and can create a lot of resistance from those people involved. So if you are leading a team, it's important to stress the fact that this is a test. This is an experiment. We're going to do an experiment and we're going to see what the outcome is before we change any system. So we need to rehearse and practice and run in duplicate and never put patient samples at risk, and then we're going to listen. It's very important that we get feedback from all of the people involved in the process to see what happened and what didn't we expect. So now at the study stage, so we have to look at what the data says. What did I hear from the text? What was the feedback from the pathologist? What happened to the product? All of a sudden, let's say that we are rushing our slides through to the pathologist and the mounting medium is still really wet. Now I have hundreds of slides that are all stuck together and a very grumpy pathologist. What other systems were affected? Well, now the pathology secretaries have to come in at a different time because your pathologist is getting the work through faster. So these are just illustrations of some of the potential outcomes. This is also an important slide. The change might not be an improvement. There are reasons why we do most things. It's certainly possible that we didn't understand something and that our experiment, I won't call it a failure, but it was an improvement over what we currently have. So now we're back to plan, do, study, act. So the great thing about this is it's a cyclical process. So we can take what we've learned and we can say, okay, let's go back and revisit where we were. Knowledge is not power. The application of knowledge is power. And my example of that is you can't blackmail somebody simply by knowing something. You have to apply that knowledge if you ever want them to write you a check. So let's presume that our experiment was successful. We're going to install the modification. So we're still going to talk to everybody that's involved. We're going to let anybody else who needs to know. We're going to document what we need to. We're going to write the SOPs. We're going to get the appropriate sign-off from everybody before we make the change. And when we've communicated to everybody and all the questions are answered, then we're going to install the modification and it becomes our new paradigm. Or if the modification didn't work, that's okay, it's cyclical. Let's go back to the planning stage. We'll talk to everybody that's involved and we find out why. What didn't we understand? But either way, we celebrate. I can't remember the exact number now, but I think of the team that cloned Dolly failed over 1,000 times before they were able to clone the first mammal. And the answer, of course, is, well, we didn't fail. We discovered 1,015 ways that cloning won't work. So now we're back to our planning stage. So let's presume again that it failed. So is the original problem still valid? It's taken me X amount of time to get from my experiment stage, my team forming stage to my experiment stage. Does the original problem still exist? Did I do a bad job of defining the problem in the first place? What didn't I understand that led to an implementation that wasn't great? Either way, move forward. So it's very important that the team understands from the beginning that this is an experiment, and what do you do when the experiment doesn't turn out like you want? Well, you modify the experiment and you try it again. So there's also the case of paralysis by analysis, and I can sometimes advocate for PDSA becoming PDCA. I worked in a laboratory one time, and my boss was completely hung up on the study portion of this. We didn't get past that. We planned, we did, and he studied, and he studied, and he studied some more. And it was really because he was frightened to move forward and actually implement a change. So it was quite a radical change. So we can call it plan, do, check, act, because this is not about studying the data to write a thesis. This is about checking the validity of the data from the plan that you had and the target that you had. So changing that word to check sometimes can help move the process forward if you think that the ultimate decision maker is likely to be hesitant at the implementation. So what is the biggest single barrier to being able to move forward with these things? It's quite simply fear. So what are we afraid of? Well, the answer is change. Change is bad. Change is always bad. Change is always going to be bad. I'm sure some of you are smiling to yourselves because that's you. The devil we know is better than the devil we don't. So this is actually something that became really key to my entire career, was understanding this next bit. I was a supervisor of a laboratory, and the resistance to even the most straightforward of potential changes was just shocking to me. It was just a tsunami of people who were disengaged, didn't want to do it, refused to be involved. And I really thought that, our relationship was okay. I couldn't understand why people weren't more enthusiastic about being able to improve the laboratory. And so that's when I came across the Gregor style delineator. By this time I was interested in process improvement, and Gregor really has a tool that is similar to a Myers-Briggs. And what he said is that people have preferred learning and operating style. And he came up with a survey which basically was a series of questions where you had a single word response. You got to choose from a boatload of words that best suited your feelings on whatever the question was. And when you were done, you looked up in the quote answer unquote book, and that gave you a point on a cross-axis chart. And the axes were concrete, abstract, random, and sequential. And my favorite part of any test, there are no wrong answers. So what Gregor said is that there's preferences for our perception, reason, intuition, and ordering. How do we see the world? How do we view the world? How do we function best? And so I took this test, and if we have a cross-axis chart, we have 4 quadrants. And Gregor said, okay, so in the random abstract quadrant, I think these people are perceptive, imaginative, idealistic, and spontaneous. In the abstract sequential quadrant, he says these people are structured, logical, deliberate, and systematic. Okay, so what does that mean? So here's our cross-axis chart, and so I took the test, and it came back that I scored pretty much all these points in the middle, which is, for those of you who know me, know that I'm perfectly balanced and the world's perfect employee. Not so, but that's what that might look like. When I gave this project to my team, then they tended to score over here. I thought, well, that's interesting. So what did Gregor say about people with the blue stars? He said these people are factual, organized, conventional, consistent, structured, logical, deliberate, and systematic. Well, I think you'll agree with me. These are excellent criteria for people to be lab techs. In medtech, histotechs, we want them to be consistent and structured and logical and deliberate and systematic in the way that they approach it. How many of those words would you associate with willingness to change? So most laboratorians are going to fall into this group here. There are people that fall over on this side. So this is a subgroup that we refer to as being anal retentive. These are people that need an SOP to breathe in and an SOP to breathe out. I would imagine that if there's groups of you, you're looking around and pointing at each other at this point. So that's one extreme. What do we have over on the other side? Well, in our random abstract side, we have lateral thinking, problem-solving, creative folks. Not bad characteristics to have at all, but sometimes these guys in the lab, it's like herding cats. Interestingly, sales folks have a lot of these characteristics. They are creative, problem-solving individuals. So I want my lab techs to be consistent, structured, systematic. I want my sales folks to be able to face a challenge and then work around it. So whereas techs might look at a brick wall and go, there's a brick wall, I cannot go past here. And I want my sales folks to go, is there a door? Is there a window? Can I go over it? Can I go under it? Can I blow it up? Those are things that you want because you want them to get past whatever the barrier to entry is. So now we have an interesting circumstance where we have sales folks that live in that world who are creating these wonderful solutions for our techs, our supervisors, our managers. So we really speak a different language. And so both sales and tech folks can take something from this that we need to try and meet each other halfway on the concrete, sequential, and random abstract scale. So back to my story then. So what I discovered is that the resistance to change was less about the particular topic than it was the fact that my guys were really hardwired to function in a fashion that made them great techs. So part of this is because we all live in our own protective bubble. We have our frame of reference of the world, and we have our comfort zone of filters and so on, and that's how we perceive things. So let's presume then that we are going to make a change in some technical aspect. Then for a tech that's been there for a few years, what they may internalize is that if we're making a change, you're telling me I've been doing it wrong. That then, of course, does attack someone's bubble of self-worth because we all want to do a good job. We all want to feel that we're performing in an appropriate fashion. And you've just told me we're going to change something that is the core of my existence, and that is a problem. So attack my bubble, and I guarantee that things bounce back with a lot more force. So how do we solve this? Well, we've got to deal with the C word. And so involvement, time, and communication. So this is a quote from Deming, who is the father of process improvement, really. And he says, the timid and the faint-hearted and people expect quick results are doomed to disappointment. In other words, it will take longer than you anticipate for these processes to occur. You can only move at the rate that your slowest person can tolerate. We talked a little bit about communication, the fact that we need to tell our staff what's going on. There are 2 types of communication, of course. There's the formal one that's provided by the facility or the institution, and the informal one that comes from the gossip and Gertie. Which one carries more weight? So it's almost like politics. You need to get out in front of the message, communicate with your staff, tell them what's going on, tell them why you're looking to make an improvement, explain what the experiment is before rumor gets around and does damage. So lastly, involvement. This is important. So most people will contribute ideas if you ask them, but even if they don't, everybody likes to be asked. And of course, if you involve people in the process, then you take away the crux of the resistance, which is nobody asked me what I thought. This is my favorite picture, an ideal opportunity for communication. and this guy has been involved in process improvement that did not go well. So the thing about change is it's not a one-time event. We can't opt out. People will get upset about it, and it's not going away. So we may as well address it. We talked about who. We talked about a team approach. So let's talk about ground rules really quickly. So these are rules that I always use. And yes, I actually print them up, and I have people sign them whenever we start a new team. It's one thing to read them out, and everybody nods and says, yes, I agree. But it means a little bit more when people actually sign on the dotted line. Meetings begin and end on time. That's important. It drives me crazy when people roll in 5-7 minutes late for a meeting. Everybody else is waiting, and then we have to get settled, and then people have to leave, and you just don't get as much done. So be strict about starting and ending on time. Our lives go on. If you can't get to a meeting, that's okay. But I think it's important that alternates are available, and they have the authority to act for whomever the team member is that is absent. Do your homework. So assignments in between meeting work needs to be done. Otherwise, projects will just drag and drag and drag because people don't get their part of it done. Life is too short. We will have fun and good humor. An open mind. Learning is better than being right. We're not point sparring here. We respond to the idea, not to the person who suggests it. Egos are checked with the codes. I like this one. Everybody is encouraged to contribute. That's why you're invited on the team. You have some knowledge, you have some vested interest. I need you to participate. Of course, we use basic communication courtesies. This is an old slide now. Beep is set on vibration. Anybody that has a beep is still, but phase is set on stun. It's important. This is supposed to be fun. We're supposed to get something out of our work life. We're there 40 hours plus a week. We should enjoy being there. We should enjoy contributing to improving our environment. So let's make sure that we always keep that in the forefront of our mind, because things will go much better. It doesn't mean there's no conflict. There shouldn't be passionate disagreements about what the best course of action is. This is a good thing. Very rarely is there only one solution. So we should have people presenting and representing different ideas, and they should be excited about it. So it's okay to disagree. You just have to do it with remembering that we will have fun and humor. So this is the agenda that I usually use. Clarify the objective. Why are we all here? Why are we taking an hour out of our busy day? Review the roles. Okay, John, you're going to be the timekeeper for today. Jane, you're going to be the recorder. Those roles change on a weekly basis. All right, so here's the agenda. We're going to talk about our brainstorming solutions today, and then we're going to start with 10 minutes to finish through it. We work through the agenda items. Okay, we have 10 minutes left. Let's review the meeting record. So the recorder will now go through and say, these are the, in general terms, these are the topics we discussed. These are the decisions that we made. Terrific. Now let's spend the next few minutes planning on next steps, the next meeting, the next agenda. And then lastly, we'll evaluate the meeting. So this is an important step. If I ask people, how did the meeting go? And they say, fine. That's not very helpful. What was it about the meeting that you liked? What was it about the meeting that you disliked? How can we improve the process? So the first time you do this, it will feel awkward and it will be self-conscious. But as you meet more frequently, you'll be able to smooth out your team meeting process, your team meeting agenda, so it becomes really functional. And then when you create your second team, it'll go much more smooth. So let's review real quick. I know we've covered a lot of topics, but let's just kind of work out through. What are we trying to accomplish, and why are we trying to accomplish it? This is going to create a preliminary op statement. Who needs to be involved? Let's involve those key stakeholders, and we make our mission statement. We know we need more people. So our key stakeholders help us identify who else should be on the team. When we have our team together, then we look at ground rules. We all sign off on the ground rules. This is how we are going to function as a team. We're going to assess the current state of affairs. What does the ground look like right now? What is our baseline? As we do that, we might need to revise our mission statement. Now that we have our baseline, let's determine a target. How will we know it's an improvement? So now we have our problem defined, we have our target defined, we can brainstorm our solutions, how we get from A to B. Choose a solution to examine, and we implement as an experiment. We evaluate the effects, we look at the outcome, we talk to people, and we determine was this an improvement or not. PDSA is cyclical. If we discover that this was not an improvement, then we go back to step 4, assess the current state of affairs, revise our mission statements. What didn't we understand? And let's go again. Declare victory. So I hope this has given you a basic understanding of how we can approach process improvement. I hope that there are items of this that you can take away and use to make your own structure. Happy to talk to more people offline about this, but that's our presentation for today.